on the morning of the 20th of May, 1851. Miss Felicity Lethbridge discovered that her family had arranged her farewell from London, before anyone had troubled to ask whether she intended to go. The evidence arrived at 10:30, borne into the morning room of Lethbridge House on the gloved hands of a footman who looked as uncomfortable as a man delivering flowers to a funeral. Felicity glanced up from the small stack of household notes she had been sorting and saw the object settle upon the table with a muted weight. It was a broad silver presentation salver, newly polished, its rim worked with laurel leaves and its center engraved in an elegant hand. Florence Lethbridge rose at once. "Oh, excellent. It's come sooner than I expected." Felicity did not move. She read the inscription upside down first, then again, after Florence turned the salver toward herself with visible satisfaction. To Miss Felicity Lethbridge, with gratitude for 20 years of devoted service. For several seconds, the only sound in the room came from the ticking mantel clock. Felicity was 42 years old. She had spent enough time among well-bred people to know that cruelty rarely entered a respectable room shouting. It arrived polished. It carried receipts. Sometimes it came engraved in silver. "How handsome," she said at last. Florence smiled, relieved by the mildness of her tone. "I knew you would understand." Arnold thought the wording a little formal, but I said 20 years deserved acknowledgement. Felicity folded the household note in her hand and set it beside the inkstand. 20 years of what? Of everything you have done for us." Florence gestured lightly, as though Felicity's life could be summarized by the arrangement of menus, the answering of callers, the smoothing of awkward dinners, the remembering of birthdays, the management of servants during illnesses, and the quiet filling of every space no one else wished to notice. "You have been indispensable." "That is not what the salver says." Florence's smile thinned. "It says service." "Yes." Felicity looked at the engraved word again. "That is what I mean." The footman, since still waiting by the door, lowered his eyes. Florence dismissed him with a glance before seating herself opposite Felicity. She had always possessed the kind of beauty that improved when she believed herself reasonable. At 35, Lady Lethbridge knew exactly how much softness to put into a rebuke. "Felicity, you mustn't make this difficult." I was not aware there was anything to make difficult. The farewell. Felicity's fingers became very still against the edge of the table. What farewell? Florence hesitated only a fraction. "The one we discussed." "We did not discuss one. Not formally, perhaps. But you have said for years that you prefer quiet. You have said you are tired of the season. You have said crowds exhaust you. All true. Then surely you see." "No." Felicity lifted her eyes. "I see that I prefer quiet. I do not see how that became permission for you to arrange my departure." Florence exhaled through her nose. "No one is arranging your departure. We are helping you toward the life you have always claimed to want." "Where?" That question changed something in Florence's expression. Felicity saw it. "Where am I being helped toward?" "The country." "Which part?" "That has not been settled." The answer came too quickly. Felicity leaned back. "Then something has been settled." Florence reached for the silver salver, as though its brightness required adjustment. "A younger relation of mine may spend the latter part of the season with us. She will need a proper room, and with your preference for retirement." "My room." "You have 2 perfectly comfortable rooms upstairs. 1 bedroom and 1 small sitting room I have used for 15 years. "Exactly. You have never cared for grandeur." Felicity almost smiled. The absurdity was too exact to wound cleanly. I have also never cared for being removed from my own life by inference. Florence's cheeks colored. You are not being removed. Then I am not leaving. Silence settled again. This time it belonged to Felicity. She had long ago ceased treating marriage as a door she expected to open. There had been no single heartbreak, no dramatic abandonment, no faithless fiancé, only years, a proposal that never came, introductions that led nowhere, friends who married, became mothers, became widows, remarried, and learned to discuss Felicity as though her unmarried state were a weather condition that had eventually become permanent. She had made peace with it. More than peace, perhaps. She had built routines she liked, evening reading, long walks when London allowed them, quiet rooms where no one required her to perform gratitude for being included. Solitude had stopped feeling like failure years ago. But solitude chosen was not the same as disappearance assigned. Florence clasped her hands. You are 42, Felicity. There it was. Not shouted, not sharpened, merely placed between them as though it settled every question. I had noticed. There is no shame in wanting a quieter life. I agree. Then why resist what suits you? Because I did not choose it. Florence's voice lowered. You cannot expect the household to remain arranged around you forever. It never has been. The words landed more firmly than Felicity intended. Florence's mouth parted, then closed. Before either woman could speak again, footsteps sounded beyond the morning room. A servant's voice murmured in the hall. Florence rose at once. Her irritation vanished beneath social composure. That will be his grace. Arnold, said the Duke of Norham, might call about the committee matter. Felicity's attention returned to the salver. Then perhaps you should move my retirement gift. It occupies half the tea table. Florence shot her a warning look. Please do not be clever. I shall try to survive the temptation. The door opened. Humphrey Charnock, Duke of Norham, entered with none of the theatricality. Felicity had come to associate with very powerful men. He was tall, broad-shouldered, without heaviness, dressed in a dark morning coat of severe cut. At 48, there was silver beginning at his temples and a restraint in his face that made first impressions difficult. He bowed to Florence, then to Felicity. Lady Lethbridge, Miss Lethbridge. Florence moved forward with practiced warmth. Your Grace, Arnold will be down directly. Do sit. We were only discussing a family arrangement. Humphrey's gaze shifted to the silver salver. His eyes rested on the inscription, long enough to read it. A retirement presentation, Florence explained. My sister-in-law has always preferred the quiet life, and at her age, the season offers very little that could interest her. We are persuading her to accept what she already knows is best. Felicity felt something inside her go cold and clear. Florence gave a small laugh. She has been teasing me by pretending reluctance, but she is past needing the season. Humphrey turned his head. Until that moment, his attention had been courteous. Now it became precise. He did not look at Florence. He looked at Felicity. Are you? He asked. Florence blinked. Your Grace? I asked Miss Lethbridge. His tone did not rise. That made the correction more complete. Felicity met his eyes. They were grey, she realized, though she did not know why the details seemed suddenly important. He did not smile at her as one smiled at a woman embarrassed before company. There was no pity in his face. No gallantry either. He was simply waiting. Waiting for her answer as though it had not already been supplied by age, family, habit, or the silver object between them. The pause stretched. Felicity felt Florence's impatience beside her, but Humphrey did not rescue her from the silence. He left it hers. Apparently everyone intends me to leave London except me, Felicity said. Something changed in his expression. Not amusement exactly, though warmth came close to it. That seems an inconvenient omission. Florence laughed too quickly. She's making more of this than it deserves. Felicity has always loved solitude. Humphrey's gaze remained on Felicity. Do you? Very much. And do you intend to leave? No, the word was simple. Felicity had said it before that morning, but this was the first time it seemed to take up proper space in the room. Humphrey inclined his head once, accepting it without correction. Then I understand. Florence stared at him. There is nothing to understand, Your Grace. This is a family matter. Of course. His reply was perfectly civil. And Miss Lethbridge appears to be a member of the family. Felicity should not have felt the smallest flicker of pleasure. She did anyway. Humphrey finally looked back at the salver. His attention settled upon the engraving, and his brow tightened almost imperceptibly. Florence followed his gaze. It was meant kindly. Kindness is often difficult to judge from an object alone. He stepped nearer the table, though he did not touch the silver. Felicity watched him read the line once more, to Miss Felicity Lethbridge, with gratitude for 20 years of devoted service. Then he looked at Florence. Who chose the word service? 2 days later, the silver salver still occupied the morning room, as if no one had quite decided whether it was a gift, an accusation, or merely an object too expensive to remove. Florence had answered the Duke's question about the word service, with a vague reference to the silversmith's customary phrasing, though Felicity had noticed that she never once claimed the wording had been suggested by the silversmith himself. Since then, no one had mentioned the inscription. That silence interested Felicity more than an argument would have done. At 11 o'clock on the 22nd of May, the butler entered and announced the Duke of Norham. Felicity had been seated near the window, with a book open, on her lap. Although she had read the same sentence 3 times, without absorbing it, Florence, who had been sorting invitation cards, immediately straightened. Sir Arnold Lethbridge was already in the room, having been warned that Humphrey wished to discuss a committee subscription. Arnold rose, with the faint air of a man who preferred ducal business to family discomfort, because the rules of the former were easier to understand. Humphrey entered in a dark morning coat, bowed first to Florence and then to Felicity, and greeted Arnold with the restrained courtesy that seemed natural to him. Felicity had remembered his face more clearly than she had intended. She had also remembered the way he had waited for her answer. That was more troublesome. Florence began speaking almost at once. Your Grace, I'm glad you came. Felicity and I have settled our little disagreement. Felicity closed her book. Have we? Arnold shifted beside the fireplace. Florence means there's no longer any cause for unpleasantness. Humphrey looked from one to the other. That sounds less like a settlement than a hope. Felicity lowered her eyes for a moment, not because she was embarrassed, but because she suspected a smile might be unhelpful. Florence saw it anyway. Felicity is quite reconciled to the country plan, she said. She was only startled by how quickly matters advanced. I am reconciled to nothing of the kind. Florence's fingers tightened over the cards. Felicity, if His Grace is to be told my mind, I should prefer the inconvenience of supplying it myself. Humphrey's gaze settled on her. Again he did not intervene. Again he waited. Arnold cleared his throat. Perhaps we might discuss the subscription first. Certainly, Humphrey said, but I believe Lady Lethbridge raised the other matter. Florence gave a light laugh. only because I don't want you to think we are forcing my sister-in-law into anything. She has always preferred quiet." Humphrey turned slightly toward Felicity. "What kind?" The question was so simple that Felicity did not understand it at first. "I beg your pardon, what kind of quiet do you prefer?" Florence stared at him. Arnold looked faintly puzzled. Felicity felt something inside her loosen. No one had ever asked for the particulars. People said she liked solitude as though it were a diagnosis. "Reading after dinner," she said. "Long walks when the streets permit them. A room in which no one expects me to speak, merely because silence has become uncomfortable. Music heard from another room rather than performed at one's elbow." The corner of Humphrey's mouth moved. "A very specific piece. I have had time to refine it. And the season? I do not despise it." She glanced toward the window, where Mayfair moved beyond the glass in a procession of wheels, hooves, and polished carriage panels. "I simply ceased expecting it to give me anything essential. That is not the same as wishing to vanish from it." "No." Florence folded one invitation card with more force than necessary. "Your Grace, this conversation makes Felicity sound positively exiled. She has been comfortable here for years." Humphrey answered without looking away from Felicity. "Comfort and consent are not the same question." Arnold shifted again. "No one is speaking of exile. Then there should be no difficulty if Miss Lethbridge prefers to remain." The room quieted. Felicity watched Humphrey more carefully. He was not fighting for her. The distinction mattered. He was making room for an answer he had no intention of supplying himself. Florence seemed unable to decide whether that was better or worse. Arnold rescued himself by reaching for the committee papers on the side table, the subscription list. Humphrey allowed the subject to change. For the next quarter hour, the conversation turned to charitable patronage, names, amounts, and the tedious diplomacy of persuading wealthy people to fund good works without allowing them to believe they had been insufficiently thanked. Felicity listened more than she spoke. Humphrey did not try to draw her into matters that were not hers, but twice she saw his attention flick toward her when Arnold made a particularly inflated claim about what society considered generosity. She suspected he had noticed her expression. That awareness warmed her in a way she found disproportionate. When the papers were finally gathered, Florence rang for tea. The tray arrived, and with it a new inconvenience. The salver occupied so much of the central table that the footman had to set the teapot at an awkward angle. Florence gave an irritated sound. "That wretched thing is forever in the way." Felicity looked at the silver. "It has achieved more influence in 2 days than I have in 20 years. Humphrey's restrained expression broke for a moment. It was not quite laughter, but it was close. Felicity felt an answering warmth before she could stop it. Florence reached for the salver. "We should move it." "Allow me," Humphrey said. At the same instant, Felicity rose and placed her hands beneath the opposite rim. The salver was heavier than it appeared. They shifted it together toward the sideboard. As they adjusted their grip, Felicity's fingers brushed the side of Humphrey's hand along the cold silver edge. The contact lasted no more than a breath. Humphrey released first, not abruptly, not as though he had been burned. He simply gave her space before the moment could become something she had not chosen. Felicity became acutely aware of the polished silver between them, of the quiet room behind them, and of the fact that Florence had gone very still. Humphrey looked at Felicity rather than at their hands. "Would you prefer it removed from the room?" he asked. She studied the salver. The engraving shone back at her with offensive elegance. Not yet. Why? Florence demanded. Because I should like to know what was decided before I was invited into the decision. Arnold's face changed. It was small, almost nothing, a tightening around his mouth. Humphrey saw it too. Felicity knew, because his gaze moved to Arnold for a fraction of a second before returning to her. He did not ask the question that rose between them. Not yet. That restraint registered as sharply as the brief touch had. Felicity sat again. Humphrey did the same. Florence poured tea with unnecessary precision. You're making a mystery where there isn't one. Then it should be easily resolved, Felicity said. Humphrey accepted his cup. Who ordered the salver? Florence paused. When? Felicity asked. Florence looked at her. Does it matter? I do not know yet, Arnold intervened. Felicity, there's no need to interrogate Florence over a gift. Then perhaps you can answer. I don't remember the date. The reply came too quickly. Felicity looked at him. Her brother had always been poor at lying, and very good at believing that vagueness was not quite the same thing. Humphrey said nothing. That silence made Arnold's evasiveness louder. The butler entered before anyone could pursue it. Lady Bromley and Miss Carden, my lady. Florence's posture transformed at once. Show them in. Two women entered in a small sweep of perfume, silk, and mourning civility. Felicity knew Lady Bromley slightly and Miss Carden hardly at all. Greetings were exchanged. Lady Bromley's eyes brightened when she saw Humphrey. Then she noticed Felicity and clasped her hands. My dear Miss Lethbridge, how fortunate. I had meant to write before you disappeared into the country. Felicity felt the room contract around the words. Before I what? Lady Bromley's smile faltered. Your retirement. Florence mentioned it last week. Somewhere in Surrey, isn't it? How peaceful you'll find it. Felicity did not look at Florence. She looked instead at Humphrey, because she already knew what she would see there. Not surprised that there was a plan. Surprised that the plan had acquired a county. He set his untouched teacup down very carefully. Felicity turned back to Lady Bromley. Surrey, she repeated. I am afraid that is the first I have heard of it. Lady Bromley's surprise was genuine enough to make Florence's composure more revealing than any confession. Surrey? Felicity repeated, keeping her voice even. I'm afraid that is the first I have heard of it. Lady Bromley looked from Felicity to Florence, then back again. Oh, I must have misunderstood. You didn't? Florence said quickly. Felicity is merely being precise. Nothing is absolutely settled. Miss Carden lowered her teacup with the careful attention of a woman who suddenly understood that she had entered a room containing more entertainment than anyone had promised her. Sir Arnold stepped away from the fireplace. There's been some discussion of the country. That's all. Felicity turned to her brother. Discussion with whom? Arnold's eyes moved toward Florence. It was answer enough. Humphrey remained seated, one hand resting lightly against the arm of his chair. He did not look at Arnold or Florence now. He watched Felicity, and that quiet attention steadied something in her that anger might otherwise have unsettled. Lady Bromley attempted a rescue. Well, wherever you go, my dear, I hope you'll be very happy. Thank you, Felicity said. At present, I am going nowhere. The words were polite. Their effect was not. Florence's smile hardened at the edges. Felicity enjoys being dramatic when she has an audience. Humphrey's gaze shifted to Florence. I have not found Miss Lethbridge dramatic. You have known her for 2 mornings, Your Grace. Then perhaps I have been fortunate in both. Felicity looked down before Florence could see the warmth that touched her face. it was not the compliment itself that affected her. Humphrey had not described her as charming, brave, clever, or deserving. He had merely refused a false description. The distinction felt strangely intimate. Lady Bromley soon found reason to discuss the great exhibition, and the conversation moved on with the strained obedience of people pretending nothing unusual had occurred. Yet before she left, she squeezed Felicity's hand and said quietly, "I truly thought you had chosen it. Florence told me last week that you had longed for peace in the country for years." Felicity heard the exact phrase, peace in the country. She stored it carefully. By the time Humphrey rose to leave, Arnold had succeeded in discussing almost none of the committee business that had supposedly brought the Duke to the house. Humphrey bowed to Florence, then to Felicity. His eyes met hers for one measured second. "Good morning, Miss Lethbridge. Good morning, Your Grace." There was nothing improper in it, nothing anyone could name, yet Felicity remained aware of the doorway for several moments after he had gone. Florence waited until Lady Bromley and Miss Carden had also departed. Then she turned. "You embarrassed me." Felicity looked at her. "By telling Lady Bromley the truth, by contradicting me in front of the Duke. You told him I had agreed to leave London, because that was the understanding." "Whose understanding?" "Ours, not mine," Arnold sighed. "Must we begin again?" Felicity's restraint thinned. "I would prefer not to. That is why I am asking Florence to stop telling people that I have chosen something I have not chosen." Florence rose and gathered the abandoned invitation cards into a neat stack. "And what would you have me do? Call upon everyone I have spoken to and announce that you have suddenly become undecided?" "I have not become undecided." "Then what are you?" "Unconsulted." Arnold rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Felicity, no one meant harm. I have not accused anyone of meaning harm. You make it sound as though we plotted to exile you. No, I make it sound as though you made plans for me without asking. That is exactly what happened." Florence turned from the table. "You have said 100 times that you are tired of London. Being tired of London on Tuesday does not constitute a lifelong contract with the countryside. You said you preferred quiet. I do." Felicity stood. "I also prefer tea to wine. I should be astonished if you therefore ordered every bottle removed from the house." Arnold almost smiled before deciding against it. Florence did not. "This is childish. No, it is very simple. Please stop telling people I am retiring." Florence stared at her for a long moment. "If I retract it now, you will make the family ridiculous. Then perhaps the family should have waited until I agreed before announcing my future." Arnold stepped between the argument before Florence could answer. "Let it pass, Felicity. Please. If nothing is settled, nothing need happen. There is no reason to turn a misunderstanding into a scandal." Felicity looked at the brother whose childhood fevers she had sat through, whose bills she had quietly sorted when arithmetic offended him, whose household she had helped smooth because peace was easier than protest. Affection remained, so did disappointment. "Letting it pass is how a misunderstanding becomes a decision," she said. "I will not do that." She left the morning room before either of them could ask her to be reasonable again. Over the next 3 days, the story reached her twice more. The first time came during a morning call from an elderly acquaintance who praised Felicity for having the courage to abandon the exhausting nonsense of town. Felicity corrected her gently. The woman blinked and confessed that Lady Lethbridge had spoken as though arrangements were already underway. The second came from a distant family connection encountered while Felicity returned from a short walk. The woman expressed envy that Felicity would soon have nothing to do but read beneath Surrey trees. Felicity almost laughed. The rumor had furnished her imaginary retirement more generously than her family ever furnished her actual rooms. By then, she understood the mechanism. There were no forged letters, no invented declarations, no elaborate deception. Florence had taken something true and stretched it until it ceased to belong to Felicity. She did enjoy solitude. She had said so often. She had merely never said that she wished to surrender London, her rooms, her acquaintances, or the right to decide when one life ended and another began. On the afternoon of the third day, a footman brought a card to Felicity in her sitting room. The envelope bore a respectable hand and was addressed to her directly. Humphrey's widowed sister invited Miss Felicity Lethbridge to join a small party visiting the Great Exhibition at the Crystal Palace early the following week. Felicity read the invitation twice. The pleasure that rose in her was immediate, and that annoyed her. She had intended to attend the exhibition eventually. Everyone in London spoke of the vast glass building in Hyde Park, of machines, textiles, jewels, instruments, and objects gathered from across the world. She needed no duke to make such a visit interesting. Yet, when she imagined the party, Humphrey was there before she could prevent him from being there. His quiet voice, his grave attention, the brief warmth in his expression when she had joked about the salver. Felicity folded the invitation carefully. She was too old to confuse curiosity with destiny, and too honest to pretend curiosity was nothing. At dinner, Florence noticed the card beside Felicity's plate before Felicity had decided whether to mention it. "What is that?" "An invitation." "From whom?" Felicity told her. Florence's fork paused. Arnold looked up. "The exhibition?" he asked. "Yes." Florence recovered first. "You should decline." Felicity looked at her. "Why?" "Because people already believe you are leaving society. To appear publicly with the Duke's family now will make it seem as though you are clinging to London. Because His Grace has shown you little attention." The insult was delivered softly, almost anxiously. That made it more effective. Felicity felt it. She also recognized it. 3 years earlier, she might have declined simply to avoid being discussed. 10 years earlier, she might have wondered whether Florence was right. At 42, she was tired of allowing other people's possible interpretations to become instructions. "Then people will have to survive their confusion," she said. Florence's expression sharpened. "Felicity, don't be foolish. I haven't attended the exhibition yet. I should like to see it. With his family. I was invited by his sister. And you imagine that distinction will matter?" Felicity considered the question. Then she thought of Humphrey, asking what kind of quiet she preferred, as though the answer itself mattered more than what it allowed him to conclude. "It matters to me." She picked up the invitation. "I shall accept." Later that evening, as Felicity crossed the upper landing toward her room, voices carried from Arnold's study below. She did not stop, but the house was quiet enough that Florence's words rose clearly through the stairwell. She was content until he noticed her. Arnold answered too softly for Felicity to distinguish the words. Florence's reply came sharper. "Then Hillcross must be settled before she changes everything." By the first week of June, London seemed to have decided that the Great Exhibition was not merely an event but a duty, and Felicity found herself carried toward Hyde Park, in a closed carriage with Humphrey's widowed sister, 2 respectable acquaintances, and the uneasy knowledge that she had accepted the invitation, partly because she wished to see the Crystal Palace, and partly because she wished to see the Duke of Norham. The second reason annoyed her. The first was easier to defend. Through the carriage window, the vast glass structure appeared by degrees between trees and traffic. Impossible in scale and almost indecently bright beneath the afternoon sun. Inside, the air held the blended sounds of thousands of voices, footsteps, machinery, foreign languages, and astonishment. Felicity had expected spectacle. She had not expected abundance to feel so personal. Everywhere she looked, someone had made a choice, a pattern woven into cloth, a hinge cut differently, a machine designed to perform one task instead of another, a cabinet fitted with drawers because some unknown maker had decided where each object ought to belong, for a woman whose future had recently been discussed as though preference were a public resource. The sight of so many deliberate decisions felt almost provocative. "You are frowning at progress," Humphrey's sister observed with amusement. Felicity turned. "I'm trying to decide whether progress always requires quite so much brass. You must ask my brother. He has opinions on subjects no one invited him to possess." Felicity smiled, and then the sister's attention shifted beyond her shoulder. "There, you may ask him yourself." Humphrey approached through the moving crowd with the same measured composure he carried into drawing rooms, though the exhibition made composure look almost eccentric. He bowed to the ladies, greeted his sister, and then looked at Felicity, not through her, at her. "Miss Lethbridge." "Your Grace, have you discovered anything indispensable?" "Several things apparently believed indispensable by their manufacturers." His mouth warmed. "That is a diplomatic answer. I had hoped you would appreciate one. I appreciate them professionally. I distrust them socially." The reply surprised a laugh from her before she could contain it. His sister glanced between them and announced that she wished to inspect a display of French textiles with the other ladies. The group remained together, but the movement of visitors rearranged their positions until Felicity and Humphrey walked side by side several paces behind. There was nothing improper in it. There were people everywhere. Yet Felicity became conscious of the space between his sleeve and hers, as though the crowd had narrowed only around them. "Do you like it?" he asked. She looked upward through the glass roof, where light fell across ironwork and banners. "I think I do, though I'm not certain I like being told I ought to." "That sounds familiar." Felicity glanced at him. "Does everything become political to you?" "Eventually. That must be exhausting." "It is." He said it without humor. The plainness of the answer made her look again. Around them, a group of gentlemen argued cheerfully over an agricultural implement. A child pointed toward a glittering case of jewelry. Somewhere nearby, metal struck metal in a demonstration that drew applause. Humphrey seemed momentarily separate from all of it. "You said the other day that public life has made solitude difficult," Felicity said. "Is that what you meant?" His gaze moved ahead. "Partly. There is always someone watching a decision. A dinner becomes a signal. A visit becomes an endorsement. Silence becomes displeasure. Courtesy becomes preference. And preference becomes intention." He looked at her then. Yes, the word held more understanding than consolation. Felicity folded her gloved hands loosely before her. "I used to think solitude meant no one had chosen you." Humphrey waited. She was beginning to understand that waiting was one of the ways he listened. "Then I discovered it could simply mean that one stopped standing in rooms hoping to be chosen. Was that peaceful, eventually? And now? The question unsettled her because she had no practiced answer. Now I am discovering that peace and wanting nothing are not quite the same thing. His expression changed, very slightly. No, you sound certain. I am certain of very few things. A dangerous admission for a duke. An impossible one for a politician. She smiled, but his gaze remained serious. I have spent most of my life being observed, he continued. That is not the same as being known. Felicity felt the words settle between them with a weight different from flirtation. No, she said softly. It isn't. They had reached a section where the crowd thickened around a mechanical display. The aisle narrowed abruptly as visitors pressed inward. Felicity stopped, rather than allow herself to be pushed forward. Humphrey noticed before she spoke. He moved half a step nearer, enough to shield the space beside her without touching. Would you take my hand? He asked quietly. Or would you rather wait? The question struck her with more force than the crowd. He had not assumed she needed guidance. He had not seized her elbow. He had given her two choices and made neither sound foolish. Felicity looked at his offered hand. It was gloved, steady, palm slightly open. She placed her hand in his. I'll take it. His fingers closed around hers with controlled warmth. He guided her through the congestion. Not pulling, merely maintaining a path between bodies and display cases. Felicity was aware of the pressure of his hand in a way she had not been aware of anyone's touch for years. It was not dramatic. That was precisely why it mattered. The contact asked nothing beyond what she had agreed to. When they reached a quieter gallery, Humphrey slowed. His grip loosened at once. Felicity could have withdrawn immediately. Instead, for one heartbeat longer than necessary, she left her fingers resting against his. She felt his attention shift to her face. He did not tighten his hand. He did not make the moment larger than she had chosen. She withdrew first. Thank you. You are welcome. His voice was even, though not entirely unaffected. Felicity turned toward a case of carved woodwork, because she needed something that did not look back. I suppose this confirms your suspicion that I dislike crowds. No. No. It confirms that you prefer choosing how you move through them. She looked at him. You do listen dangerously well. Only when someone says something worth remembering. The warmth that rose through her was inconvenient again. This time, she did not resent it. Their party rejoined them near a display of musical instruments, and the rest of the visit passed in easier conversation. Humphrey did not monopolize Felicity. He spoke to others, answered questions, allowed himself to be drawn away by acquaintances. Yet twice she caught his gaze across the shifting crowd, and each time something unspoken passed between them. Not possession, recognition. By the time the carriage returned, Felicity to Lethbridge house, the afternoon had left her tired in the pleasant way of a day actually lived rather than endured. Florence was not in the hall. Arnold had gone out. A footman handed Felicity a letter that had arrived while she was away. For you, miss. The paper bore the address of a house agent in Surrey. Felicity's pleasant fatigue vanished. She carried the letter to the morning room, where the silver salver still rested on the sideboard beneath the afternoon light. For a moment, she simply stood between the two objects, one already engraved with a future she had not chosen, and the other sealed with details she had not yet been told. Then she broke the seal. The first line addressed her as the prospective occupant of Hillcross Cottage. The house agent's letter was courteous enough to make the intrusion feel almost absurd. It thanked Miss Lethbridge for her anticipated residence at Hillcross Cottage near Richmond, and asked whether she preferred the blue bedchamber furnished with the existing mahogany suite or the smaller south room, which enjoyed a better view of the garden. There was also a question about whether she wished to retain the current cook-housekeeper. Felicity read the page twice. By the third reading, the words had stopped being surprising and begun to arrange themselves into something colder. Someone had selected the cottage. Someone had paid enough money to make a house agent write to her, as though the only uncertainty left concerned furniture. She folded the letter carefully and found Arnold in his study before dinner. Florence was already there. That, too, told Felicity something. Her brother looked up from his desk and immediately saw the paper in her hand. "You've heard from Mr. Whitcomb." It was not a question. Felicity closed the door behind her. "Apparently I am expected at Hillcross Cottage in July." Florence rose from the chair beside the fire. "Expected is too strong a word. The agent wishes to know which bedroom I prefer. That is merely preparation. For a house I have never seen." Arnold leaned back, discomfort moving across his face. "Felicity, I was going to explain." "When?" He did not answer at once. "Before July, that is generous." Florence stepped in. "Don't be sarcastic. Hillcross is a very pleasant place. The agent assured us it is quiet, respectable, and not so far from London that you would be cut off. How thoughtful." Felicity laid the letter on Arnold's desk. "Who rented it?" Arnold looked at the page rather than at her. "I reserved it." "In whose name?" "Mine." "And paid a deposit?" "Yes." "With whose money?" His head came up. "Mine." That answer mattered. Felicity had a modest maternal annuity of her own. It did not make her wealthy, but it meant she was not legally dependent on Arnold for every shilling. He had not taken her money to secure Hillcross. He had done something more ordinary and, in its own way, more astonishing. He had purchased a future for her and assumed she would enter it when told. "Then the cottage is your arrangement," she said. "Not mine." Arnold rubbed his forehead. "We thought it would please you." "You thought I would be easier to please after the decision was made." Florence's patience broke first. "What would you have had us do? Ask whether you wished to remain indefinitely in rooms that will soon be needed?" "Yes." Florence stared. Felicity continued. "You could have asked. I might have considered another arrangement. I might have chosen to move. I might even have liked Hillcross, but I would have chosen it. You are making a principle of a kindness. Because you made a plan out of an assumption." Arnold stood and came around the desk. "No one meant to cast you out." Felicity believed him, which somehow made the hurt cleaner. "I know." "Then why speak as though we did?" "Because harm does not become harmless, merely because no one intended it." Florence crossed her arms. "My cousin Pauline is coming for the latter part of the season. She needs a room. You have said for years that London exhausts you." Felicity looked at her. "And therefore I should be moved before Pauline arrives." "You make it sound ugly." "I am describing the order in which it happened." Arnold's voice softened. "Felicity, Hillcross is comfortable. There is a small garden. Richmond is close enough for visits. You could read, walk, have quiet. It is precisely the life you claim to want." "No." The word surprised even her with its steadiness. "It is the life you have assembled from things I have said." "That is not the same thing." Arnold glanced at Florence, then back to her. "What do you want, then?" It was the first time either of them had asked. Felicity felt the question arrived too late and still matter. "At this moment, I want you to write to Mr. Whitcomb and tell him I will not take Hillcross Cottage." Florence made a sharp sound. "And lose the deposit?" Arnold chose to pay it. Her brother winced, but Felicity did not look away. "I did not." You would let your own brother lose money simply to prove a point? Florence demanded. Felicity felt anger rise, but she refused to let Florence decide its shape. No, Arnold may decide whether to keep the cottage, offer it to someone else, or forfeit the deposit. Those are his choices. Mine is that I will not live there. Arnold was silent for a long moment. At last he said, "Very well." Florence turned on him. "Arnold." She did not agree. The admission seemed to cost him. We should have asked. Felicity gathered the letter from the desk. Yes. She left them with the problem they had created. 2 days later, Humphrey called at Lethbridge House at the proper morning hour. Florence received him because propriety demanded it, but her civility was brittle. Arnold had gone out. Felicity joined them in the morning room, where the silver salver still occupied the sideboard like a witness no one wished to dismiss. Humphrey rose when she entered. His gaze found her face quickly, enough that she knew he noticed the strain she had tried to conceal. He did not ask about it until Florence had been called away by a servant regarding a tradesman at the back entrance. Only then did Humphrey say, "You have learned what Surrey meant." Felicity almost smiled. "Hillcross Cottage." "Hillcross?" "Near Richmond. My brother reserved it for July." Something sharpened in Humphrey's expression. "Without your agreement, without my knowledge, has the agent been told?" The question came too quickly. Felicity saw the next thoughts form behind his restraint. Which agent? What terms? Whether the Duke of Norham could intervene, whether a letter bearing a ducal seal might solve in 1 hour what had taken her family weeks to arrange. Humphrey saw her seeing it. He stopped. The change was visible. "Forgive me," he said. "That was not the question I should have asked." Felicity studied him. "What was? What do you intend to do?" The answer eased something in her chest. "I have refused the cottage. Arnold will deal with the arrangement he made." Humphrey nodded once. "Good. You approve?" "I approve of your choosing." She looked toward the salver. "Florence thinks I am making too much of a kindness." "Do you?" "No." "Then her opinion is not useful on that point." Felicity let out a quiet breath. "I knew they considered me settled. I did not know settled meant movable." Humphrey's jaw tightened. "There are several things I could offer to do. I know, and I suspect you do not want any of them." "Not yet." He gave a small, rueful inclination of his head. "Then I shall attempt the difficult art of doing nothing." "Is it difficult?" For a man raised to believe every problem arrives, awaiting his authority. His mouth moved faintly, extremely. The honesty of it touched her more than competence would have. Felicity looked down at her hands. "I am not frightened of being alone. I know. I am frightened of discovering that. Everyone thought my willingness to be alone meant I had stopped having preferences." Humphrey did not answer at once. He stepped no closer. Instead, he extended one gloved hand between them, palm open. No command, no solution. Felicity looked at it, then at him. His face held no expectation she could not refuse. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed gently around hers. The contact was warmer than it had been amid the crowds of the exhibition. There was no movement required now, no narrow aisle to cross, no practical reason to remain joined. That made every second unmistakable. Felicity felt her breathing slow. Humphrey said nothing. For once, silence did not mean dismissal or absence. It meant someone was willing to remain without filling the space with decisions. She tightened her fingers around his once. His thumb shifted lightly against the side of her glove, then stilled. When she finally loosened her hand, he released her immediately. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not arranging anything." A quiet smile reached his eyes. "I shall try not to make a habit of disappointing you." The door opened before she could answer. Florence returned, composed again, and her gaze dropped at once to the distance between them, as though she could measure what had happened there. She looked toward the salver, then at Felicity. "I hope," she said, "that whatever private conclusions have been reached, you remember that the farewell presentation cannot simply be cancelled. Half London already knows." By the middle of June, Felicity had learned that a rumor did not need to be false to be cruel. It needed only to take a true thing and arrange it so neatly that no room remained for the person inside it. She had indeed said she liked quiet. She had indeed complained that the season could be exhausting. She had indeed declined invitations in years when crowded rooms had seemed to offer nothing worth the trouble of enduring them. By the time she arrived at Lady Wexhamscombe's garden supper in Mayfair, however, those harmless facts had been polished into a new story. Miss Lethbridge had always intended to retire. Miss Lethbridge had been perfectly content with the plan. Miss Lethbridge had changed her mind only after the Duke of Norham began paying her attention. Felicity became aware of the version in stages. First came the glances, then the small pauses after her name. Finally, as she stood beneath a striped awning while servants carried trays of lemonade and wine along the terrace, Mrs. Henshaw, a woman Felicity had known for nearly 15 years without ever being intimate with her, offered a smile that was meant to be sympathetic. "My dear, I think it's rather brave." Felicity had heard enough ominous beginnings that she knew better than to thank her. "What is changing your plans?" "I was not aware you knew my plans." Mrs. Henshaw's smile faltered. "Only in the general sense. Then I am fascinated to hear them." The woman glanced toward a cluster of guests near the roses, lowered her voice, and proceeded anyway. "Well, everyone understood you had decided upon a quieter life in Surrey. Sensible, really. At 42, the season becomes more exhausting than rewarding, doesn't it? But then, His Grace took such an interest, and naturally, one can understand why a woman might reconsider." There was nothing vicious in the tone. That made it worse. Felicity felt the insult reach her not as a blow, but as a careful reduction. A woman of 42 could be content only if she expected nothing. If she wanted something after all, it must be because a man of rank had awakened vanity in her. She looked at Mrs. Henshaw and saw no enemy, only confidence. That, too, had become tiring. Changing one's mind requires first having made it, Felicity said. Mrs. Henshaw blinked. "I beg your pardon? I never chose Surrey. I never agreed to leave London. I never asked for Hillcross Cottage. So whatever story you have heard about my romantic reversal is at least one decision ahead of me." A gentleman beside them turned his face away too slowly to pretend he had not heard. Mrs. Henshaw colored. "Oh, I'm sure no one meant, I know." Felicity smiled, not warmly. "That seems to be the most popular defense this month." A low voice came from her left. "It has the advantage of requiring very little effort." Humphrey stood a few feet away, a glass untouched in one hand. Felicity had not seen him approach. He bowed to Mrs. Henshaw, who greeted him with startled politeness and found urgent reason to join another group almost immediately. Once she was gone, Felicity looked at Humphrey. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to know that Mrs. Henshaw has discovered a new branch of mathematics in which 42 equals finished." Felicity stared at him. Then, against her better judgment, she laughed. Not the small, courteous sound expected in company. A real laugh escaped her before she could contain it. Humphrey's expression warmed in answer. "Your Grace," she said, still fighting amusement. "That was unkind. I was attempting accuracy, a dangerous habit. So I have been told." The lightness between them was new. Until then, their conversations had carried an undertone of caution, as though both understood that Felicity's circumstances made every act of attention liable to interpretation. Now, for several moments, neither of them seemed interested in defending against interpretation at all. Humphrey glanced toward the gravel path curving beyond the terrace. "Would you care to walk?" He paused before adding, "Only if you wish to." Felicity noticed the correction. "I do." He offered his arm in the ordinary public manner, nothing more intimate than etiquette allowed. Felicity placed her gloved hand lightly upon it. The gesture was conventional. Her awareness of him was not. They moved away from the awning at an unhurried pace, still within easy view of the guests. Lanterns had not yet been lit. Evening rested pale over the garden, and conversation followed them in softened waves. "I am beginning to think Florence has achieved something remarkable," Felicity said. "She has persuaded society that my age is not merely a number, but an administrative condition." Humphrey glanced down at her. "With forms, perhaps. Naturally, one must apply for permission to continue having preferences after 40. Is there a fee? Severe? Can it be waived for good behavior?" Felicity looked at him. "Absolutely not. Good behavior is the problem." He laughed then, quietly but without restraint. The sound surprised her. She had seen his mouth soften before, had caught brief flashes of humor. But this was the first time she had heard him laugh, as though he had forgotten to guard it. The effect on her was immediate and deeply inconvenient. "You enjoy this far too much," she said. "I enjoy you far too much." The words came easily, but after them Humphrey's expression changed. Felicity felt it too. The path seemed suddenly quieter, though the garden had not changed. He did not withdraw the statement. Neither did he embellish it. Felicity kept her hand on his arm. "That sounds almost personal." "I fear it was. How reckless. I am not known for recklessness." "Then I shall consider myself honored." They walked several paces before Humphrey spoke again. "May I tell you what troubles me most about the story being told?" "If you like. It praises your contentment only so long as your contentment costs no one anything." Felicity turned her head toward him. His tone had lost its humor. "Explain." "They approve of your quiet because quiet does not inconvenience them. They approve of your independence because it asks for no room, no consideration, no alteration of expectation. The moment you say no, or remain in London, or accept an invitation they did not expect you to accept, your peace is recast as foolishness." Felicity felt the truth of it so sharply that she stopped walking. Humphrey stopped with her. "I had not thought of it that way." "Neither had I until I watched them congratulate you for surrendering something you never offered." She looked at him. "You watch more than you say. Politics rewards that, does it?" "Sometimes. Other times, it merely teaches a man to hear the shape of what is not being said." Felicity considered that. "And what is not being said now?" He met her eyes. "That you are allowed to want something different tomorrow from what you wanted yesterday." The simplicity of the sentence undid something small inside her. For years she had defended solitude because it had become hers. She had built dignity around needing less. Yet Humphrey was not asking her to abandon that dignity. He was making room for change without treating change as contradiction. "I am not certain what I want tomorrow," she said. "Good. Good? Certainty is overrated." Another dangerous admission for a politician. You already know too much." The warmth returned, gentler this time. Felicity looked ahead toward the terrace, where Florence stood in conversation with two women near the open French doors. Even at a distance, Florence's posture was too controlled. She had seen the walk. She had probably seen the laughter. "She will dislike this," Felicity said. Humphrey followed her gaze. "Our walking? My enjoying it. That seems an exhausting thing for Lady Lethbridge to manage." Felicity smiled. "She has stamina." He did not ask whether Felicity wished him to challenge Florence. He did not offer to silence gossip. Instead, when they reached the turn in the path, he asked, "Another circuit, or shall I return you to the terrace?" Felicity looked at the guests, then at him. Another circuit. His eyes warmed again. "As you wish." They continued beneath the trees, her hand still resting lightly on his arm. Back on the terrace, Florence watched them disappear behind a bank of clipped yew. Later that evening, when the supper had thinned and the last carriages began drawing up, she drew Arnold aside near an unoccupied card table. Her voice was low, but anger sharpened it. "This has gone far enough." Arnold looked toward the garden doors. "What would you have me do?" "Nothing. I shall do it." "Florence, the salver was ordered for a farewell. A farewell is what she will have." Arnold's face tightened. "She has refused Hillcross. Then she can refuse it after half London has heard what she is choosing instead." Florence picked up her gloves from the table. The presentation goes forward. The farewell began. Before Felicity realized that Florence had brought the silver salver into the room. It was the 18th of June, and Lady Marden's summer supper had drawn enough of London into her Mayfair house to make privacy impossible and gossip efficient. The windows stood open to the warm evening. Servants moved between crowded rooms with trays of wine and lemonade, and conversation rose beneath the chandeliers in a polished hum. Felicity had been speaking with an elderly acquaintance near the long windows when she noticed Florence standing beside a side table at the far end of the drawing room. Arnold was with her. Between them, gleaming beneath the candles, rested the salver. Felicity's stomach tightened. Until that moment, the object had remained at Lethbridge House. Florence had done more than refuse to cancel the presentation. She had transported the entire insult into a room filled with witnesses. Felicity excused herself from the conversation and crossed halfway through the room before Florence lifted her glass. "If I might have everyone's attention for only a moment." The noise softened almost at once. Florence had always possessed the social gift of sounding modest while ensuring she was heard. Felicity stopped. She could feel people turning toward Florence, then toward her. Arnold's expression was strained. He did not meet Felicity's eyes. Florence smiled. "I hope Lady Marden will forgive me for stealing a minute from her supper. But our family has wanted for some time to mark a change that is both happy and, for us, rather emotional." Felicity's pulse slowed instead of quickening. That happened when she was very angry. The room seemed to sharpen around her. Florence continued, "My dear sister-in-law, Felicity, has given more than 20 years of devotion to our family and household. Those who know her well know how little she has ever cared for noise, fashion, or the demands of the season." Several heads inclined. Felicity recognized the truth being assembled again. Each piece was familiar. The shape was not hers. "She has always longed for quiet," Florence said, "and at last we have persuaded her to accept it." A few people smiled. Someone murmured, "How lovely." Florence gestured toward the salver. "Hillcross Cottage, near Richmond, has been arranged for her, and we wished to present this small token of gratitude before she begins the peaceful country life she has chosen." The room applauded lightly. Felicity heard the sound as though from very far away. Chosen. That word almost undid her composure. Florence looked toward her with practiced affection. "Felicity, come." For one instant, Felicity considered simply walking out. The temptation was powerful, because leaving would end the scene immediately. Yet leaving would also permit Florence's version to remain standing after she had gone. She had done enough disappearing for the comfort of other people. Felicity crossed the room. As she did, she became aware of Humphrey near the mantel, several yards from Florence. He had been speaking with two gentlemen. Now he was watching her. He did not move toward her at once. He did not interrupt. Florence took Felicity's approach as surrender and softened her voice. "I know you dislike attention, but even you must allow us this." Felicity stopped beside the salver. Before she could answer, a woman near the front said with laughing sympathy, "You nearly escaped. Us without ceremony. Miss Lethbridge." Another voice added, "Though I suppose London has become unexpectedly difficult to abandon this year." A ripple moved through the group. Felicity knew exactly what was meant. Humphrey did too. Florence gave a small, indulgent laugh. Well, even sensible women may become a little foolish when they are unexpectedly admired. That was the cut. Not loud, not vulgar. It reduced everything that had happened since May to vanity. Felicity's refusal of Hillcross became romantic embarrassment. Her decision to remain in London became a middle-aged woman's desperate response to a duke's notice. She saw pity appear on one face and amusement on another. Her throat tightened. Then Humphrey moved. He came only close enough to stand at her side, not between her and the room. His voice was low enough that only she could hear. "Do you want me to speak?" Felicity turned her head. His expression was controlled, but she could see anger in the stillness of it. More importantly, he was waiting. He could have silenced the room with a sentence. Everyone there knew it. He knew it too. Yet he asked. Felicity took one breath. "Not yet." Humphrey inclined his head. "Very well." He stepped half a pace back. The choice steadied her more completely than rescue would have done. Felicity turned to Arnold. "May I ask you something?" Her brother looked miserable. "Of course. Did I ever sign an agreement for Hillcross Cottage?" A hush spread outward. Arnold glanced at Florence. Felicity did not. "No," he said. "Did I request that you reserve it? No. Did I approve it before you paid the deposit?" Arnold's jaw tightened. "No," Florence intervened. "Felicity, this is hardly the place. You chose the place." The answer was quiet. Florence's face changed. Felicity turned back to Arnold. "Did I ever tell you I intended to leave London this summer?" Arnold looked at the watching room, then at his sister. "No." The word landed differently from the applause. Florence set down her glass. "No one is denying that the details were arranged for you. Families do such things. The cottage was meant as a gift." "A gift?" Felicity looked at the salver. "And this? Also a gift. Then it belongs to me?" Florence hesitated. "Of course it does. Good." Felicity placed both hands beneath the heavy silver rim. She remembered lifting it with Humphrey 2 weeks earlier, remembered the accidental brush of their fingers, remembered saying she wanted to know what had been decided before she was invited into the decision. Now the answer was standing around her in evening dress. Florence stared as Felicity lifted the salver from the table. "What are you doing?" "Accepting my gift." A few guests shifted. No one laughed now. Felicity held the salver steadily despite its weight. The inscription caught the candlelight. To Miss Felicity Lethbridge, with gratitude for 20 years of devoted service. She looked down at the words, then back at Florence. If this is mine, then I shall decide what it commemorates. Florence's lips parted. Felicity continued before she could answer. It will not commemorate my retirement, because I am not retiring. It will not commemorate Hillcross Cottage, because I did not choose Hillcross Cottage, and I will not live there. And it will not commemorate a family decision made kindly on my behalf, because a decision about my life remains mine, even when everyone else is certain they know what will suit me. The room was completely silent. Felicity felt the old instinct to soften the truth, to rescue Arnold from discomfort, to spare Florence humiliation, to assure everyone that no harm had been meant. She let the instinct pass. I do prefer quiet, she said. I do sometimes tire of London. I am 42, and I have no objection to the number. None of those facts means that my life has ended, or that anyone may arrange the remainder of it without asking me. Florence's face had gone pale with anger. You are humiliating your own family. Felicity met her gaze. No, I am correcting an announcement you made about me. Someone near the windows exhaled softly. Lady Marden, who had remained silent during the exchange, gave Felicity a long, thoughtful look. Arnold lowered his eyes. Only then did Felicity turn toward Humphrey. He had kept his promise. He had not said a word. She gave the smallest nod. Humphrey stepped forward. His voice was calm, carrying easily through the room. Miss Lethbridge has said she is not retiring. He looked across the gathering, not at Florence alone. Then no one here should speak as though she is. That was all. No declaration, no threat, no rescue disguised as authority. Yet the effect was immediate. A woman who had been whispering closed her mouth. A gentleman looked away. Florence stood beside the empty table where the salver had rested, deprived not of rank but of the certainty with which she had used Felicity's silence. Felicity held the silver against both palms. For once, its weight felt honest. She remained at the supper another 20 minutes. That mattered to her. She spoke to Lady Marden. She accepted 1 glass of lemonade. She did not flee from the eyes upon her. Humphrey did not hover, though once across the room their gazes met, and the quiet respect in his face affected her more deeply than any public defense could have done. When Felicity returned to Lethbridge House later that night, the salver came with her. She carried it upstairs herself, rather than allowing Florence to reclaim it. Then she entered her private sitting room, lit her mother's dented brass candlestick, and opened the wardrobe. From the upper shelf, she took down a traveling case. She had refused Hillcross. She had refused retirement. Now, for the first time, she intended to leave Lethbridge House on terms that belonged entirely to her. By the next morning, Felicity had already decided that leaving Lethbridge House would not become another family discussion, disguised as permission. She waited until breakfast was over, then asked Arnold to meet her in his study before he went out. Florence followed without invitation, which saved Felicity the trouble of repeating herself. Arnold looked tired. Florence looked offended before anything had been said. Felicity placed no papers on the desk. She brought no argument prepared for approval. "I am taking rooms in Bloomsbury," she said. Arnold stared at her. "For how long?" "I do not know yet." Florence gave a short laugh. "This is absurd." Felicity looked at her. "No, it is inconvenient. Those are different things." Arnold came around the desk. "You cannot mean to leave the house over one unfortunate evening." "I am not leaving because of one evening." "Then because of Hillcross?" "Not because of Hillcross either." She folded her hands. I am leaving because I have spent too many years allowing usefulness to become the price of my place here. I do not wish to discover what remains of my life only after someone else has finished arranging it. Florence's color rose. You are making us sound cruel. I am not responsible for how the facts sound. We gave you a home, yes. Felicity's voice softened. And I helped make it run. Arnold looked away. She had not intended the sentence as an accusation, but the truth of it settled heavily. Felicity had managed the small things no one counted because they were always done. She remembered which tradesman required reminding and which servant needed gentleness rather than correction. She kept birthdays, illnesses, household schedules, inconvenient guests, overlooked accounts, and 100 other matters from becoming problems large enough for Arnold or Florence to notice. None of it made her a servant. None of it made them monsters. It had simply become so ordinary that everyone had forgotten the work belonged to a person who might one day stop doing it. Arnold lowered himself into the chair behind the desk. We're in Bloomsbury, a respectable house kept by a widow. I made inquiries this morning through Mrs. Bell, who knows the landlady. Florence stared. This morning? Yes. You arranged lodgings before speaking to us? Felicity almost smiled. I thought you preferred decisions made efficiently. Arnold winced. Florence did not. You think yourself very clever. No, I think myself 42. Felicity held Florence's gaze, which, I have recently learned, is old enough to choose my own address. Arnold raised a hand before Florence could answer. Do you have enough income? The question held genuine concern. Yes, my maternal annuity is modest, but sufficient for respectable rooms and ordinary expenses if I live carefully. You have always contributed here, voluntarily. Arnold's face tightened. He understood the distinction immediately. Felicity continued. I shall pay the household expenses I personally committed to before this week. Beyond that, I will no longer contribute simply because I am present. Florence folded her arms. And what are we supposed to do? Felicity looked at her. Manage your household. The words were neither cruel nor triumphant. That made them harder to reject. Arnold rubbed his forehead. Felicity, if this is about last night, I said what was true. You did. I admitted you had never agreed. And I am grateful you did not lie. Then stay. We can correct the rest quietly. Felicity felt affection tug at her. This was the danger. Arnold was not a tyrant. He was her younger brother, weak where conflict was concerned and kind, when kindness cost nothing difficult. It would have been easy to remain for his sake. She had done easy things for other people all her life. No, she said. If I stay now, every future disagreement will end with someone saying I never truly meant to go. Florence's mouth hardened. So you will parade your independence through Bloomsbury and leave everyone to assume we drove you out. People may assume what they like. I am finished organizing my life around interpretations I cannot control. By the afternoon, the house had begun to reveal Felicity's absence before she had even left it. A servant came to ask Florence which grocer's account required settling before Friday. Florence did not know. Arnold wanted a note sent to a committee secretary and discovered Felicity usually remembered the address. A dinner acceptance had been mislaid because no one had transferred it from the hall tray to the household book. None of the problems was serious. That was precisely the point. They were the small frictions. Felicity had absorbed so consistently that the household had mistaken the absence of difficulty for the absence of labor. She packed only what belonged to her. Clothing, books, private correspondence. A few personal ornaments. The silver farewell salver, which Florence had publicly declared to be Felicity's gift and which Felicity now kept in her possession, and from the table, beside her bed, her late mother's dented brass candlestick. The candlestick was plain, slightly uneven at the base, and worth almost nothing beside the salver. Felicity wrapped it herself. She had lit it through years of evenings when solitude had been companion enough. She saw no reason to leave it behind, simply because she was choosing a different room in which to be alone. On the 21st of June, a hired carriage took her from Mayfair to Bloomsbury. The journey was short enough to feel almost anticlimactic. No dramatic horizon opened. No ancestral gates closed behind her. London merely changed street by street. The Bloomsbury house was respectable, narrow, and quieter than Lethbridge House. Its widowed landlady received Felicity with brisk courtesy and showed her 2 rooms overlooking a small rear garden. The furniture was plain. The carpet had faded near the window. Felicity loved the place almost immediately because nothing in it had been selected for a future someone else expected her to inhabit. She set the brass candlestick on the small writing table. The silver salver she placed carefully inside a cupboard, not as decoration, but as something unfinished. By evening, the silence around her felt unfamiliar. At Lethbridge House, silence had always existed between other people's needs. Here, it belonged entirely to her. She poured tea for herself and realized there was no one to ask whether Arnold had remembered an appointment, whether Florence wished the carriage ordered, whether a servant had carried the right message upstairs. For the first hour, freedom felt almost suspicious. For the second, it began to feel like peace. Then, unexpectedly, she thought of Humphrey. Not of his title, not of the way a room changed when he entered. She thought of his hand held open before her without demand. She thought of his laughter beneath the trees. She thought of him asking whether she wanted him to speak and accepting her answer when she said not yet. Felicity looked at the empty chair across from hers and felt, for the first time in years, that solitude could be chosen and still contain an absence. The realization did not frighten her. It did, however, make honesty necessary. She missed him. The next morning, a footman from Norham House delivered a single calling card to the Bloomsbury address. No carriage followed it, no flowers, no note asking for explanation, no ducal message assuming access, only the card. Humphrey Charnock, Duke of Norham. Felicity held it for several moments while the landlady waited. "Shall I tell the gentleman's servant you are receiving, miss?" Felicity looked at the quiet room, the brass candlestick, and the unopened cupboard containing the salver. Then she looked back at the card. "Not today," she said. "Please tell him I have received it." The landlady nodded and withdrew. Felicity placed the card beside the candlestick rather than throwing it into a drawer. Humphrey had done exactly what he had promised without ever saying the promise aloud. He had let her leave. He had let her arrive. Now he was waiting for her to decide whether the door would open again. 3 days after Humphrey's calling card arrived, Felicity sent one of her own to Norham House. The act required less courage than she had expected and more honesty. She did not write a note explaining herself. She simply informed the Duke of Norham, through the respectable language of visiting cards and proper hours, that Miss Lethbridge would receive him the following morning. When he came, the Bloomsbury house felt suddenly smaller, not inferior. Felicity had already learned that distinction mattered. The front parlor was neat, plainly furnished, and bright enough despite the narrow street. Her landlady, Mrs. Denby, received Humphrey with the composed interest of a widow, who had lived long enough to be impressed by rank without surrendering judgment to it. She remained in the adjoining room, with the connecting door partly open, occupied with correspondence and close enough to preserve propriety, without pretending not to understand why the Duke had called. Humphrey entered Felicity's parlour at 11 and bowed. "Miss Lethbridge, Your Grace." His eyes moved once around the room, taking in the faded carpet, the modest mantle, the books Felicity had placed beside the window, and the brass candlestick standing on the writing table. He did not look for what was lacking. "You have settled quickly. I have had practice making rooms usable. That sounds like another kind of service." Felicity glanced toward him. "You remembered." "I remember things that trouble me." The words carried enough weight to change the air between them. He remained standing until she invited him to sit. That, too, she noticed. "Tea?" she asked. "If you are having some." "I am." Mrs. Denby's maid brought the tray and withdrew. Felicity poured. For several minutes they spoke of ordinary matters: the weather, the exhibition, an acquaintance whose enthusiasm for agricultural machinery had become an alarming social identity. Humphrey made her laugh once, and Felicity realized how much she had missed that ease. Yet beneath the conversation lay something neither of them had crossed London to discuss politely around. Humphrey finally set down his cup. "There is a reason I did not call again without an invitation. I assumed there was. I was not certain whether my presence had become another pressure upon you." Felicity studied him. "Because I left Lethbridge House. Because of what is being said about why you left." She felt her shoulders stiffen. "What is being said now?" His expression tightened slightly. "That you had been content with retirement until my attention persuaded you that you might still find a different future." Felicity almost smiled, though there was no humor in it. Florence's version has improved with repetition. It has become convenient. Convenient for whom? "Anyone who prefers to believe your choice began with me." That answer was so exact that Felicity looked away. She had expected outrage on her behalf. Instead, he had found the center of the insult. "There is more," Humphrey said. "Some people believe that if I were to stop calling publicly, the gossip might lose interest." Felicity looked back at him. His face had become carefully neutral, too carefully. "Do you believe that?" "I believe gossip often tires when deprived of novelty." "That was not what I asked." He accepted the correction. "No, I do not believe I should decide what visibility is best for you." He paused. "But I need to ask whether you want me to stop calling until the talk fades." Felicity felt the question settle inside her. 3 weeks earlier, she might have chosen the easiest answer. Avoiding attention had protected her for years. Withdrawal had often been mistaken for dignity because no one saw what it cost. She looked at Humphrey, at the man who could make himself scarce and call it restraint, and understood suddenly that she did not want another absence arranged for her, even a considerate one. No, something in his face shifted. Felicity continued before caution returned. "I have had enough people deciding that disappearing is best for me." Humphrey's breath left him slowly. "Then I will not disappear. Even if people talk, they already do. Even if it becomes inconvenient." His gaze held hers. "I am a duke in London. Inconvenience is usually what people call the moment someone refuses to behave as expected." Felicity smiled faintly. "That sounds almost rebellious." "Do not tell Parliament." The humor passed quickly. Humphrey leaned back, though his attention did not leave her. "There is something else, I should say." She waited. "Political life trains a man to believe visibility is danger." His voice was quieter now. "Every appearance signifies something. Every association is interpreted. Every word becomes useful to someone who did not speak it. I learned early that the safest course was often to control what could be seen." Felicity thought of his careful entrances, his restrained manner, his habit of speaking only after he understood a room. And now I am beginning to think safety can become another form of absence. The admission felt more intimate than the touch of his hand had at the exhibition. Felicity folded her hands in her lap. "For a man in your position, perhaps invisibility sounds restful. Often. For a woman in mine, it can become dangerous." Humphrey's brow drew slightly. Dangerous. Not physically. She glanced toward the open doorway where Mrs. Denby's pen moved faintly over paper. Socially, personally, if a woman is quiet long enough, people begin to believe silence means consent. If she needs little, they decide she needs nothing. If she lives alone without complaint, they assume they may decide where that life should be lived. Humphrey said nothing. Felicity continued, surprised by her own need to say it. "I thought solitude protected me because it asked nothing from anyone. Perhaps it did, but I also made it very easy for other people to tell themselves I had no preferences worth consulting. You are not responsible for what they chose to assume. No, but I am responsible for what I do now that I see it." Humphrey's eyes stayed on hers. "And what do you intend to do?" "Remain visible." The words felt almost strange in her mouth. "Not everywhere, not for everyone, but where I choose." He nodded once. "Including here?" Felicity understood him. The question held more vulnerability than rank. He was not asking about Bloomsbury. "Yes," she said, "including here." Humphrey looked down briefly, then back at her. "Your company has come to matter to me more than I expected." Felicity's pulse changed. He did not dress the confession in gallantry. He did not say she had enchanted him or rescued him from loneliness. He simply placed the truth between them. "How much?" she asked softly. His expression almost became a smile. "Enough that when your rooms at Lethbridge House were suddenly empty, I found myself absurdly aware that London had not become smaller, yet felt so." Felicity's throat tightened. "That is dangerously close to sentiment." "I warned you that politics had made me cautious. I did not say it had made me immune." She looked at him for one long moment. Then she rose. Humphrey rose immediately. Neither moved closer at first. Felicity could hear the faint scratch of Mrs. Denby's pen in the next room, the distant wheels in the street, the small clock ticking on the mantel. She had spent years believing that any movement toward another person must begin with need. She did not need Humphrey to save her. She did not need his house, his money, or his title. What she wanted was simpler and therefore more frightening. She wanted him to stay. Felicity crossed the distance herself. She placed her arms around him. Humphrey went completely still. For one heartbeat, then another, he did not touch her. The pause gave her room to reconsider, and she understood that was why he made it. Felicity tightened her embrace. Only then did his arms come around her, restrained but warm, holding rather than claiming. She rested her cheek briefly against his coat. The comfort of it was so immediate that she almost laughed from relief. No kiss followed. Neither of them tried to force the moment into something larger. When Felicity drew back, Humphrey released her at once. His expression had changed. The diplomat was still there, but something behind the carefulness had opened. "I take it," he said quietly, "that I may call again." Felicity smiled. "You may," he returned the smile. "Publicly, especially publicly." After he left, Felicity stood for several minutes beside the window. Then her gaze moved toward the cupboard where she had placed the silver farewell salver. Until now, she had treated it as proof that Florence had gone too far. Suddenly, that no longer seemed sufficient. Felicity wanted to know when the decision had begun. She opened the cupboard and rested her fingertips on the cold silver rim. "Now," she murmured to the empty room, "I want to know when Florence decided I was finished." 2 mornings after Humphrey left her Bloomsbury rooms, Felicity turned the silver salver upside down on a folded cloth and found the mark she had ignored from the beginning. It was small, stamped near the rim beneath the ornament, the sort of detail no guest would ever notice while admiring the engraving. She copied the mark onto a sheet of paper, then read again, the words that had come to feel less like gratitude than evidence. To Miss Felicity Lethbridge, with gratitude for 20 years of devoted service. She had spent several days asking herself whether tracing the object was petty. By breakfast, she had decided that the question itself was another form of training. Women were expected to forgive imprecision when precision became inconvenient. Felicity no longer wished to cooperate. Mrs. Denby agreed to accompany her into the commercial streets later that morning. The widow asked no unnecessary questions. She merely put on her bonnet, took up her gloves, and said, "If a woman has been presented with silver against her will, she may at least discover who charged for it." Felicity smiled. "You make investigation sound almost respectable." "At my age, most things become respectable if one walks slowly enough." The silversmith's establishment was discreet rather than grand. Its front window, arranged with candlesticks, salvers, tea services, and small presentation pieces, intended to make affection look permanent. Felicity gave the proprietor the copied mark and described the engraving. The man disappeared into a rear office and returned with a large order book bound in dark leather. "The original remains here, madam," he said. "Naturally, but I can show you the entry." Mrs. Denby stood beside Felicity as the proprietor turned several pages. His finger stopped. There it was. Lady Lethbridge. Presentation salver. Laurel border. Inscription to Miss Felicity Lethbridge. The date struck Felicity first. 10 days before the salver had appeared in the morning room. 10 days before Florence had told her there would be a farewell. 10 days before anyone had asked whether she intended to leave London. Felicity read the entry again, more slowly. "Who supplied the wording?" she asked. The silversmith glanced at the book. "Lady Lethbridge did, madam. We were instructed to engrave it exactly, including the word service." Yes. For a moment, Felicity heard Humphrey's voice from that first morning. Who chose the word service? Florence had never answered honestly, because the answer had been written here all along. Felicity rested one gloved fingertip against the edge of the page without touching the ink. "May I have a signed copy of this entry and the invoice?" "Certainly. The original book cannot leave the premises." "I would not ask it to." He prepared a certified extract in his own hand and attached the relevant invoice. Felicity paid only the ordinary copying fee. She did not ask him to interpret motives, and he offered none. That mattered. Facts were stronger when no one embellished them. Their second stop was the office of Mr. Whitcomb, the Surrey house agent, whose letter had first informed Felicity that she was apparently moving to Hillcross Cottage. He recognized her name immediately and looked deeply embarrassed. "Miss Lethbridge, I had believed the arrangement was made with your knowledge." "I know," Sir Arnold correspond with us directly. Did I ever write to you? No. Did I sign any agreement? No. Did I approve furnishings, tenancy terms, or occupation? No, madam. Then I should be grateful if you would put those facts in writing. He did. The original correspondence, he explained, would remain in his files, but he supplied a signed statement confirming that Arnold had reserved Hillcross in his own name, paid the deposit himself, and never produced any written consent from Felicity. She folded the statement beside the silversmith's extract. There was no conspiracy hidden in secret compartments, no forged signature, no stolen inheritance, only decisions made in rooms where she had not been invited. Somehow, that simplicity made the truth more disturbing. By the time Felicity returned to Bloomsbury, one final piece had arrived without her seeking it. Mrs. Denby told her that Mrs. Bell, the acquaintance through whom Felicity had first found the rooms, had called while they were out. The older woman had heard of the dispute and left a short signed note stating that Florence had spoken of Felicity's long-desired retirement during a morning call before the Hillcross letter ever reached Felicity. Mrs. Bell had assumed the matter settled because Florence had said it was. Felicity placed the three pieces together on her writing table. None proved malice. They proved something more important. Florence had begun presenting Felicity's future as decided before Felicity knew there was a decision to oppose. The salver itself remained in the cupboard across the room. Felicity did not take it out. She no longer needed to stare at it to believe what had happened. That afternoon, Humphrey called at the hour Felicity had permitted. Mrs. Denby received him as before and withdrew to the adjoining room. Humphrey noticed the papers on the writing table but did not ask until Felicity invited him to sit. "I found the date," she said, his expression sharpened. "The salver? Ordered 10 days before I first saw it. Florence supplied the inscription herself." Humphrey was silent. Felicity handed him the signed extract. He read it, then the house agent's statement, then Mrs. Bell's note. He returned each paper in the same order. "What do you want to do with this?" The question pleased her because it came before any suggestion. "There is a garden fete in Richmond next week. Lady Marden will be there. So will several of the people who heard Florence's presentation. And Lady Lethbridge? Almost certainly. You intend to answer her there?" "Yes." Humphrey leaned back slightly. "Publicly, she made the story public. That does not obligate you to do the same." "No." Felicity met his eyes. "I am choosing it." Something like approval crossed his face, but he did not praise her as though courage were a performance for him. "Then what do you need from me?" "Very little." "That may be beyond my abilities." The dry remark loosened the tension between them. Felicity almost smiled. "Stand where I can see you." His humor faded into a tension. "All right, do not speak unless I ask." Humphrey held her gaze. There was no hesitation this time. "I won't." Felicity reached across the small space between their chairs and touched his wrist lightly. The contact was brief, deliberate, and entirely hers. "I mean it." He looked down at her fingers, then back at her face. "So do I." She withdrew her hand. "Florence will try to make it about family loyalty." "Probably." "She will say I am humiliating Arnold." "Probably." "She may say I am doing it because of you." Humphrey's expression tightened. "That one I dislike. You are still not to answer unless I ask. You drive a hard bargain. I have recently become fond of choosing my own terms." His eyes warmed. "I had noticed." Felicity gathered the papers into a single folded packet and tied them with plain string. "The salver will go with me to Richmond. These will explain when it was ordered and what Hillcross actually was. Humphrey nodded. And afterward? The question was softer than the others. Felicity knew he was no longer speaking about Florence. Neither was she. She looked at him, at the man who had become important without becoming necessary, and felt the truth of that distinction settle gently inside her. After, she said, we shall see what remains when nobody else is speaking for us. 2 evenings before the Richmond Garden fete, Felicity entered Norham House beneath the eyes of servants who knew precisely who she was and, more importantly, behaved as though that knowledge required no judgment. Humphrey's widowed sister had invited only a small company to dinner. There were no curious crowds, no women who had congratulated Felicity upon a retirement she had never chosen, and no one from Lethbridge House. The arrangement was proper without being oppressive. Felicity arrived in a dark blue silk gown she had owned for 3 seasons and never particularly liked until that evening. Its simplicity pleased her now. She had no wish to appear. Transformed merely because a duke had begun looking at her as though she were worth seeing. Humphrey met the guests in the drawing-room with his sister beside him. When Felicity approached, his bow was no deeper than etiquette required, but his eyes betrayed him. They rested on her face for one quiet moment, longer than they rested on anyone else's. Miss Lethbridge, your Grace, you came. Your sister invited me. The faintest amusement touched his mouth, a devastating reminder of my place in the matter. You have survived worse, not recently. His sister looked between them and hid a smile by greeting the next guest. Dinner passed without incident, which Felicity found unexpectedly precious. Humphrey did not seat her beside himself. He did not make her the center of attention. Instead, he allowed the evening to unfold around them. They spoke across the table only twice, once about the exhibition, and once when a gentleman described a new parliamentary enthusiasm with such solemnity that Felicity caught Humphrey's eye and knew they were sharing the same uncharitable thought. The intimacy of that silent agreement affected her more than a public compliment could have done. It was nearly 10 when the ladies returned to the drawing-room, and the gentleman joined them soon afterward. The conservatory, beyond the open French doors, held only a few orange trees and late flowering plants. But the evening air, drifting through it, softened the heat of the house. Guests remained visible in the drawing-room. Humphrey's sister sat at a card table with 2 older ladies. No impropriety could reasonably be claimed when Humphrey came to stand beside Felicity near the open doors. "Are you ready for Richmond?" he asked. "No." He looked at her. "That is a refreshingly poor answer." "It is also true. Do you wish to postpone it?" "No." Felicity glanced toward the dark glass panes of the conservatory. "I think readiness is another word people use when they hope fear has disappeared." "Has it?" "No." "Then perhaps readiness is simply deciding fear does not vote." She turned toward him. "That sounds suspiciously like something I might have said." "I have been taking notes." "How political of you." "It is my only skill. I have observed at least 2 others. I hesitate to ask. You listen. Occasionally, you laugh." Humphrey's expression changed. The humor remained, but something beneath it became more exposed. "Both have become easier in your company." Felicity felt the shift immediately. Around them, conversation continued. In the drawing-room, distant enough to grant privacy, but near enough to keep the moment within the boundaries they had never crossed carelessly. Humphrey rested one hand against the back of an empty chair. "There is something I have been trying not to say too soon." Felicity's pulse quickened. That sounds very unlike a politician. It is. I am suffering. Bravely, I hope. Not particularly. She smiled, but he did not look away. I no longer envy your solitude in quite the way I did when we first spoke of it. Felicity's smile faded into a tension. Why? Because I thought solitude meant freedom from being watched, freedom from interpretation, freedom from obligation. He paused. I did not understand that peace can become a hiding place if one is too careful. Felicity considered the words. And have you stopped being careful? No, good. That surprised him, she continued. Carelessness is not courage. Then what is? Knowing what matters enough to risk saying badly. For several seconds, Humphrey said nothing. Felicity saw the diplomat return, searching instinctively for the safe phrase. Then he let it go. Your company matters to me. The words were simple. He made no attempt to ornament them. More than is convenient, more than is prudent, more than I expected. Felicity felt warmth move slowly through her. You have said something similar before. I know. And yet you sound more alarmed now, because I understand it better now. She looked toward the drawing room, then back at him. I have learned something as well. What? Companionship does not have to be constant to be real. Humphrey waited. I used to think marriage, if it ever came, would require surrendering every quiet room I had learned to value, that one could either belong to oneself or belong to someone else. And now I think that may have been a false choice. His gaze softened. I would never ask you to give up your quiet. I know. You say that with dangerous confidence. You have earned some. That answer visibly struck him. Humphrey looked down for a moment before meeting her eyes again. After Richmond, if you still wish it, I would like to court you. Felicity's breath caught, but he continued before she could answer. Properly, openly, without asking tomorrow's confrontation to decide the matter for us. Why after? Because you asked that the public conflict remain yours to finish. I will not place my intentions over it, like a banner. Felicity felt something inside her settle. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Why? Because I am about to make restraint much more difficult. The humor in his voice could not conceal the emotion beneath it. Felicity remained very still. Humphrey took one step nearer. Not enough to touch. Enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence and see the small tension at the corner of his mouth. May I kiss you? The question was quiet. There was no claim in it, no rescue, no assumption that affection had already been granted, because trust had. Felicity's heart beat hard enough to make 42 years seem suddenly irrelevant. She had imagined, in younger days, that a first kiss after long disappointment must feel like being swept into some force larger than oneself. This did not. This felt like standing entirely within herself and choosing to move. Yes, she said. Humphrey did not close the distance. Felicity did. She stepped forward first. His hand rose slowly to her cheek, stopping just short until she leaned into the touch. Then he kissed her. It was gentle, restrained, and warm enough to make every careful conversation before it feel like part of the same sentence. There was no urgency in him, no attempt to turn permission for one kiss into permission for more. Felicity rested one hand lightly against his coat. When they separated, neither moved away at once. Humphrey's forehead almost touched hers before he checked the motion, and the restraint made her smile. You are thinking too much, she whispered. I have had 48 years of practice. A serious disadvantage. Can it be cured? I hope not entirely. He smiled then, fully, and Felicity felt an answering happiness that was neither youthful nor foolish. It belonged to the woman she was now. Humphrey lowered his hand from her face. Felicity caught it before it fell away. She threaded her fingers through his and kept them there. His gaze dropped to their joined hands, then returned to her. "Tomorrow changes nothing," she said. "You still do not speak first. I remember. Even if Florence provokes you, especially then, even if she speaks about you, Felicity." His thumb moved once across the back of her hand. "I gave you my word." She held his gaze. "I know, that was the greater intimacy. Not the kiss, not even his hand in hers. Trust freely given and deliberately kept." From the drawing room came the sound of Humphrey's sister laughing over a card trick. Felicity knew they would have to return in another moment. She also knew she did not regret a single second of remaining where she was. Before they stepped back through the open doors, she tightened her fingers around his. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "let me be the first voice you trust." Humphrey did not hesitate. "I will." By the time Felicity's carriage reached Richmond, the summer afternoon had already settled, warm and bright over the villa gardens, and she had nearly convinced herself that courage would feel different once there were witnesses. It did not. Her gloves were dry, her breathing steady, and fear remained exactly where it had been when she dressed in Bloomsbury. The difference was that fear no longer held a vote. The garden fete had drawn much of the same social circle that had witnessed Florence's farewell presentation. Striped awnings shaded long tables. Servants carried lemonade through groups gathered beneath clipped trees. Beyond the lawn, the river flashed between branches. Felicity had brought the silver salver in its protective wrapping, along with the silversmith's signed extract, Mr. Whitcomb's statement, and Mrs. Bell's note. The original silversmith's Audiobook remained where it belonged, at the silversmith's premises. The house agent's original correspondence remained in his files. Felicity carried only what had been properly supplied to her. She had no intention of turning a garden into a courtroom. She wanted only to prevent Florence from continuing to call assumption consent. Humphrey was already there. He stood near the edge of a gathering beside his widowed sister, dressed with the same restrained precision. Felicity had come to associate with him. When he saw her, his expression changed only slightly. No one else might have noticed. Felicity did. He bowed when she approached. "Miss Lethbridge." "Your Grace." He did not ask whether she was ready. He did not remind her of their agreement. He merely held her gaze for a quiet second, and she knew he remembered every word. "Stand where I can see you. Do not speak unless I ask." His sister greeted Felicity warmly and drew her into the company without spectacle. For nearly half an hour, nothing happened. That delay was almost worse than confrontation. Felicity spoke to Lady Marden, accepted a glass of lemonade, and answered questions about Bloomsbury without apologizing for living there. She saw Florence arrive with Arnold. Florence wore pale grey and the expression of a woman determined to prove she had been injured by someone else's resistance. Arnold looked older than he had 3 weeks before. He noticed Felicity, hesitated, then inclined his head. She returned the gesture. No reconciliation existed between them yet, but neither did she wish to pretend he had become a stranger. Florence did not approach immediately. Instead, Felicity watched her speak to 3 women near the rose border. One glanced toward Felicity, then another. The pattern was familiar. Selective truth traveled faster when dressed as concern. Felicity set down her glass. "It has begun," she said quietly. Humphrey stood several paces away. He heard but did not move. Lady Marden looked from Florence to Felicity. "Would you prefer to leave?" Felicity almost laughed. Once, the question would have sounded merciful. Now it sounded like the old solution in a kinder voice. "No," she said, "I would prefer to remain." The opportunity came sooner than expected. Florence approached with 2 acquaintances and a strained smile. "Felicity, I'm relieved to see you looking well." "I am well. I had worried the unpleasantness might have made society difficult for you." Felicity met her eyes. "Society has survived me." One of the women smiled before remembering she should not. Florence's mouth tightened. "I hope we can at least agree that what happened at Lady Marden's supper was regrettable." "Which part?" "The public airing of a private family kindness." There it was. Felicity felt several nearby conversations quiet. Florence knew how to choose her stage too. "You mean Hillcross?" Felicity asked. "I mean everything. You had spoken for years of preferring solitude. Arnold and I tried to give you exactly that. We could hardly have known that you would suddenly decide you wanted a different life." Her gaze flicked, briefly, but unmistakably, toward Humphrey. Circumstances changed. Felicity could have answered the insinuation. Instead, she chose the truth beneath it. "Yes, I preferred solitude." Florence looked almost triumphant. Felicity continued. "I never gave anyone permission to turn preference into disappearance." The garden seemed to still around the sentence. Florence's smile vanished. "No one tried to make you disappear." "Then this should be simple." Felicity nodded to the servant who had been holding the wrapped parcel nearby. She had arranged the practical detail herself upon arrival. The servant placed the package on a garden table and withdrew. Felicity removed the cloth. The silver salver flashed beneath the afternoon light. Several people recognized it immediately. Florence's face changed. "You brought that here? You gave it to me publicly. I thought it appropriate that it return to the discussion." Felicity rested one hand on the rim. "This salver was presented as evidence that I had chosen retirement. I wanted to know when that retirement had been decided." She unfolded the silversmith's signed extract. "The order was placed 10 days before I first saw the salver. Lady Lethbridge supplied the inscription herself." Florence drew herself up. "Of course I did. It was intended as a surprise." "That is precisely the problem." Felicity held out the extract to Lady Marden, who read it before passing it to another respected matron. Felicity did not send it from hand to hand endlessly. The document only needed to establish the date. "At that point," Felicity said, "I had not agreed to leave London. I had not been asked." Florence's cheeks colored. "A presentation gift proves nothing except affection." "Agreed." Felicity took out Mr. Whitcomb's statement. "So I asked about Hillcross Cottage." Arnold's gaze dropped. "Mr. Whitcomb confirms that Sir Arnold reserved the cottage in his own name, paid the deposit himself, and never received a letter, signature, or instruction from me approving residence there." Florence looked at Arnold. "Surely you are not going to allow this?" Felicity turned to her brother. "Arnold, is the statement true?" He stood very still. Around him were people whose opinion mattered to Florence, perhaps more than his did. Felicity saw the old instinct in his face: avoid conflict, smooth the room, let discomfort pass. Then slowly he looked at her. "Yes," Florence inhaled sharply. Arnold continued, his voice rougher. "Felicity never agreed to Hillcross. I arranged it." "Because we believed she wanted it," Florence said. Arnold closed his eyes briefly. "We believed it would be convenient." That word changed the room. Felicity had not expected him to offer it. Florence stared. "Convenient?" Pauline needed the rooms. The household expenses were increasing. Felicity had always managed without asking for much. He looked at his sister. I told myself that meant she would not mind. Felicity felt the admission land somewhere deeper than anger, and when I did mind, Arnold swallowed. I wanted you to let it pass because correcting it embarrassed me. Florence stepped forward. This is intolerable. We were trying to help you. Everyone knew you preferred a quiet life. You were entitled to misunderstand me once, Felicity said. Her voice did not rise. You were not entitled to build a future from the misunderstanding and call it mine. No one moved. She placed Mrs. Bell's note beside the other papers. Before I ever received the Hillcross letter, acquaintances were already being told that I wished to retire. The story was not merely repeated after my agreement. It was circulated before I knew there was anything to agree to. Florence's face had gone pale. And what do you want now? Applause? Pity? Neither. Felicity looked around at the women who had congratulated her, pitied her, laughed about her age, or merely believed what they had been told. I want this understood. My brother needed convenience. His wife believed she understood my wishes better than I did. Society found the story plausible because I am 42 and unmarried. None of those things made the decision theirs. Lady Marden stepped forward. It did not. The simple statement mattered because it came from the hostess, not the Duke. Another woman, one who had repeated the Surrey rumour weeks before, lowered her eyes. I was told you had chosen it. I know, Felicity said. She did not punish the woman for believing a lie presented as fact. Florence looked toward Lady Marden. Surely you don't intend to treat a family disagreement as grounds for social judgment. Lady Marden's expression cooled. No, I intend to treat repeated misrepresentation as grounds for deciding whom I trust to organize my subscription events. The consequence was neither dramatic nor legal. It was social, and Florence understood its weight immediately. Lady Marden continued, I will make other arrangements for the autumn committee. One of the patronesses beside her murmured agreement. Another looked away from Florence entirely. Arnold spoke before Florence could answer. Hillcross will be cancelled. I will bear the loss. Felicity looked at him. Thank you. Do not thank me. His face tightened. I should have done it when you first said no. That was the first apology she believed he understood. Florence stood isolated now, not abandoned by society in a theatrical instant, but deprived of the unquestioned authority she had used so easily. Felicity felt no triumph, only relief. The truth had finally become less complicated than the story built around it. Then she looked across the lawn. Humphrey had not moved. He had not spoken. He had kept his word, even when Florence's insinuation involved him directly. Felicity met his eyes. Your Grace? Only then did he step forward. Miss Lethbridge. His gaze passed over the gathering, for whatever value my own conduct has. In correcting the rumour, my interest in Miss Lethbridge began after I discovered that others were speaking for her. She never asked me for money, influence, protection, or advancement. She did not remain in London because I persuaded her to do so. He paused, and she certainly did not leave her brother's house at my direction. Florence said nothing. Humphrey looked at Felicity. That is all I have to add. Felicity felt emotion rise so swiftly that she had to breathe before answering. He had not claimed her. He had not announced an intention to marry her. He had simply returned the truth to its proper owner. Later, when the worst attention had broken apart and guests had begun drifting toward refreshments again, Felicity walked along a garden path within sight of the gathering. Humphrey joined her only after she nodded permission. For several moments they said nothing. You kept your word, she said. You asked me to. Florence gave you several excellent excuses not to. She did, and I discovered I disliked all of them. Felicity smiled. Then she stopped beneath the shade of a cedar and turned toward him. The noise from the fete reached them softly. Humphrey's face was more open than she had ever seen it. "There is something I should have said before," he said. "I have spent my life believing careful words were safer than honest ones. They are not." Felicity's heartbeat deepened. He took no step toward her. "I love you, Felicity." There was no flourish, no title between them, no promise offered as payment for what she had endured. Only the truth. Felicity reached for his hand. "And I love you, Humphrey." His fingers closed around hers. She was the one who moved nearer. She put her arms around him, and his embrace came around her with warmth that no longer needed to pretend indifference. Felicity closed her eyes for one brief moment against his shoulder. She had not been rescued from solitude. She had chosen someone worth opening the door for. When she drew back, Humphrey did not release her hand. "When this noise has settled," he said, "may I court you properly?" Felicity looked at him, at the man who had walked into a room where everyone else had already decided her future and had begun by asking what she wanted. "You may," she said. 8 weeks changed less than society expected and more than Felicity had once believed possible. She did not return to Lethbridge House after Richmond. She did not move into Norham House because Humphrey had declared his love. She remained in her Bloomsbury rooms, where Mrs. Denby continued to receive callers with the same unimpressed dignity she brought to dukes, tradesmen, and nervous cousins alike. Humphrey came openly at proper hours and never once suggested that courtship required Felicity to abandon the independence she had only just claimed. 3 days after the garden fete, she asked Arnold to call. He arrived without Florence. For several minutes, they spoke with the awkward care of siblings who had loved one another for years and understood one another poorly. Felicity returned the silver salver to him, wrapped in plain cloth. "It was given to me," she said, "and I used it for what I needed. I don't want it in my home." Arnold accepted the weight with both hands. "I'm not sure what to do with it. That decision is yours." He looked down at the covered silver. "Hillcross is cancelled. I lost the deposit." Felicity waited. Arnold gave a tired, almost embarrassed smile. "I deserved that answer before you gave it." "Yes, I have reduced the autumn entertaining. Pauline will remain with her mother, instead of coming to London. Florence is furious. That is unfortunate. You don't sound devastated. I have become less responsible for Florence's feelings." Arnold looked at her then, and something in his face softened. "I am sorry, Felicity. Not only for Hillcross. For all the years I treated your competence as though it were simply part of the house." She felt the apology land where anger had once been. It did not erase anything. It did not need to. "Thank you." "Will you forgive me?" Felicity considered him carefully. "I think I will, eventually. But forgiveness won't mean returning to manage your life." Arnold nodded. "I know. That was enough for the beginning of peace." Florence did not apologize. She withdrew from several social commitments after Lady Marden replaced her on the Autumn Subscription Committee, and women who had once accepted her version of Felicity's future without question became more cautious in her presence. Felicity did not celebrate the change. Consequence was not the same as vengeance. She was content to let Florence live with the smaller authority her own choices had created. Humphrey, meanwhile, proved that courtship could be both formal and unexpectedly tender. He brought no extravagant jewels. He did not fill her rooms with flambeaux too large for the mantel or gifts too expensive to refuse gracefully. He brought books only after asking whether she wanted them. He called when invited. He walked with her when she wished to walk, and accepted without injury when she preferred an afternoon alone. Once, during a particularly crowded reception, he caught her eye from across the room and raised one questioning brow toward the terrace doors. Felicity nodded, and 5 minutes later they were outside together, laughing quietly, because neither of them had survived the gathering with the patience expected of their rank. Their affection grew in the spaces where neither had to perform. By the 5th week of courtship, Felicity knew that she loved him, not because he had changed her life, but because he had never required her to deny the life she had built before him. Humphrey proposed on a mild August afternoon in Mrs. Denby's parlour. He did not kneel immediately. He sat opposite Felicity with his hands clasped and looked more uncertain than she had ever seen him in Parliament's shadowed corridors or a crowded drawing-room. "Before I ask anything," he said, "I need to know what you want marriage to preserve." Felicity felt a smile begin. "That is a very Humphrey question. I have been accused of worse, my quiet." He nodded. "Yes, my own hours sometimes. Yes, the right to close a door without it meaning anger. Yes, the right to disagree with you in public if you say something foolish." His mouth curved. "That seems less necessary. Then I shall require it twice." He laughed softly. Felicity continued, "I don't want to become another piece of your public life to be managed." His expression sobered. "You never will. And I don't want you to believe loving me means you must protect me from every uncomfortable room. I have learned the danger of that idea." "Good." She looked at him steadily. "What do you want?" Humphrey's answer came without diplomacy. "A life in which you are present because you choose to be. Rooms where I am welcome, and rooms where I know enough not to enter unasked. Arguments that end honestly. Mornings when you read and ignore me, evenings when you don't." His voice lowered. "And as many years as we are given." Felicity's eyes stung. Humphrey rose then and came to stand before her. "Will you marry me?" There was no rescue in the question, no urgency, no bargain. Felicity reached for his hand. "Yes, I will." His fingers closed around hers, and the happiness in his face made him look younger without diminishing the man he had become. The banns and legal arrangements proceeded properly. Their marriage was not hurried into secrecy or staged as a spectacle. When Felicity became the Duchess of Norham, she did so before witnesses who understood that she had arrived there by choice, not because solitude had finally defeated her. She kept her Bloomsbury rooms until after the wedding and moved her personal belongings herself into Norham House. Among them was her mother's dented brass candlestick. No servant polished away the mark. Felicity made certain of that. Late in August, Norham House opened for her first receiving evening as Humphrey's wife. The guest list had been assembled at a writing table with 2 chairs pulled side by side. Humphrey suggested names. Felicity removed some and added others. A few guests were people who had known her long before anyone attached a ducal title to her name. Others were new. Arnold came alone and greeted his sister with quiet warmth. Florence did not attend. Felicity had not invited her. No one gasped at the decision. No one needed to. Throughout the evening, Humphrey did not present Felicity, as though London required evidence that she had become important. He simply stood beside her when custom required and moved away when the room belonged more naturally to her. Felicity discovered that being seen did not feel like exposure when she controlled the terms. Near midnight, the final carriage rolled away. The doors closed. The great rooms settled into silence. Felicity and Humphrey escaped to a smaller private sitting room where 2 candles burned on a side table. One stood in her mother's dented brass holder. The other rested in Humphrey's old plain silver candlestick. They did not match. Felicity had refused to replace either. Humphrey loosened his formal expression before he loosened anything else. "Well?" he asked. She sat beside him on the sofa. "Well, what? Do you find married life less peaceful than solitude?" Felicity looked toward the 2 flames. Once, one light had been enough. She still believed that. The difference was that she no longer mistook enough for all she might ever want. "Not less peaceful," she said. "Less empty in the places I no longer wish to keep empty." Humphrey's face softened. "I love you," she smiled. "You have already said that. I intend to be repetitive on this point. Then I suppose I must tolerate it." Felicity touched his cheek. "I love you too." She leaned forward and kissed him first. His hand covered hers, warm and familiar, while the kiss remained gentle and entirely theirs. When they parted, Felicity did not move away. Humphrey threaded his fingers through hers. They sat together in the quiet room as the last sounds of the household faded beyond the door. 2 unmatched candles burning steadily beside them, neither light diminished by the other.